Let's go!
Why is there so many newer players that are able to be good? Effectively, new players would not have been good at the old games because old games were harder. There was actual execution. Okay, I see from either end where it's like, well, that isn't exactly fair, like yada, yada, yada. I got to bring it back to what I was just talking about. The thing that I have to remind myself when I go back to the early 2000s and I was learning to be like really good at some shit was that we didn't have information. Sometimes you just didn't know how things worked. And the ability for you to acquire said information is difficult, much less the ability for you to even have access to the fucking game itself. Be reminded that we did not have an effective good version of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike until 2005. That most people, when they played games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, were playing the wrong versions of it on PS2 and shit. We didn't even have the ability to go into training mode for a lot of these games, being relegated to just jamming quarters in machines and just hoping that, you know, maybe the things I learned in a funky ass PS1 version is going to translate to the arcade. I think the comparison of like, yes, you're right. Execution has gotten easier. Duh. Like, we can all see that. Fighting game devs want more people to have access to do cool shit. Even new players will agree that that shit's true. But at the same time, not giving people, like nowadays, that are really good at this shit, the benefit of the doubt that if you were back then, why do you think that they would not have also been able to figure this shit out? Different skill sets have changed. Now it's more about like really reading your opponent instead of the execution behind it. And that's just kind of the way fighting games have moved over the years. But at the same point, it's like, if they put in just as much friggin' time as you did, would that have worked out back in the day? We don't have the answers for that, man. It's like, okay, maybe not. I don't know. But to be real, I've mentioned this a couple of times about being good at fighting games in arcade days. If you're over the age of 30 and you have a big specific memory of arcade fighting games, you wanted to get better at them, so you found something that's like deceptively good. Back in the day, we called these moves that had priority. Right? Frame data didn't even exist in our minds for the most part. We didn't have enough information for that stuff that wasn't wildly available. So you just found the moves that had the best priority and were the most cheesy you could possibly do. So most of the games were based on a feel, and you would just find the shit that is just like really good, and then suddenly you will just wipe the floor with people. Somebody's gonna ask you, hey, how did you do that? Are you going to share that information with them while you're currently on like your 10-game win streak and 6 other people are behind you to play? Fuck no, dude. Information is what made us better. Knowing what we knew about how fighting games worked was not wildly available. Like, it was fairly limited. So even in those moments, right, the amount of people that were actually sharing information was limited. I'm going to break down how it's way different now than it was way different then. As somebody that was an up-and-coming Third Strike player, it was my destiny, right? I was putting everything into this. I practiced every single day. I was going to arcades. I was trying to find the best players. I was actively going out of my way to find competition to be good at. I had a problem. I was running out of competition. Couldn't find other people at times that were as good as the game. And it was making me mad to the point where if you wanted to go out and hunt down top level players, that wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy thing to look up even footage and information of other top level players and how they play to see what strategies they're coming up with. You didn't have that. I wanted to find out how to get better at this stuff, and I hit a brick wall where suddenly the only way I'm going to be able to do this is to find people that know other people. When do they show up here? When is there going to be a tournament or a Ranbat or something going down? I have to go there and watch people do this shit. I need to get an old SBO DVD to see what the hell did somebody do in CVS2? Like, what the hell's going on? You had to like really go out of your way to find this information, and the best hope you had was that somebody on SRK wanted to share that with you. But most of the time, that was not the case, man. People didn't want to share that. I would argue, back in the early 2000s, there was absolutely what almost felt like an out-of-the-bubble, conscious effort from the top-level fighting game players to hold that shit. There was almost a conscious effort of them to sort of stay in a sort of focused group and keep that information gated. so that no other people really knew about it. The best people were only playing the other best people, and they had no interest in playing people outside of that for the most part. It felt like it was actively hard to become better. What's different about that than it is today? Well, today, now you have everything. I almost have to give modern players a bit of credit today, because it almost feels like these people were undefeatable back in the day. And the only people that were able to defeat them was when you got into tournaments and they were only fighting each other, right? It was a very, very, very small pool of people that were actually good at these fighting games at the top level. But now you get people that show up from like the middle of nowhere and suddenly they're mad good. How did they get access to a skill set, to a player base that was so good at the game to put them on that level and elevate them? Well, there's online. There's information everywhere. There's people here. There's people there. People can just literally rank up to a point in an online fighting game and only fight against other people that are mad good. So I don't think it's really fair to compare whether or not these current players can match the skill of players from back in the day, because back in the day, access to information, much less access to skilled players, you could only do it if you went to a tournament, you fought them, and you made your way out there. And that took commitment, it took time, it took money. Now, what do you need to do it? What do you need to, if you want to be good at Tekken, what do you need to do? Oh, just like, you know, eventually get to purple ranks, get to Tekken God ranks, and you'll start fighting people that are good. The available folks that are going to be mad good at the game are going to be up there. So you just stay home, and what do? You play. You grind the shit out of these games. Look up information. You look up match charts. You have an infinite amount of resources to work with. So to me, the comparable skill is different. The amount of people that, it isn't just that the games are getting like easier to play and whatnot. In fact, nowadays, I feel like it's even harder to be good at fighting games, which is what a lot of, I'd say, more professional players are saying, that it's harder to be good at fighting games because I'd say the skill pool seems to be getting bigger and bigger. I find a lot of these like conversations, instead of it just boiling down to something as like simple as this, I prefer to look to it as like a bigger picture and just like compare what we had access to. We didn't even have fucking arcade sticks, man. Like we had to learn multiple controller methods just to like be good at games and stuff. And now like everything's everywhere. So I kind of really respect the folks that are good now, because they are playing the shit out of these games. They're playing the holy shit out of them. And that's kind of the answer I have to give you, where it's like, hey, how do I get good at fighting games? I mean, to be real, nowadays, it isn't about finding some cheesy strategy and just repeating it over and over again until you know, get absolutely blown up and it doesn't work anymore. Nowadays, you get past green ranks and all of a sudden everyone starts blocking your fucking lows. Just using Tekken as an example, right? So really, modern fighting games force you to like evolve and get better much faster. The games themselves give you enough like offensive tools to sort of like break past that, but really the best players usually show up, you know? In most of these fighting games, who are the best Street Fighter 6 players? The Street Fighter 5 players? Who's likely going to be the best Tekken 8 players? Most likely the Tekken 7 players. We don't have answers for all of this stuff yet to see like where exactly Tekken is going to go and all this shit, much less Street Fighter 6. We already have a pretty good idea. I don't think people realize how good we have it right now. And there's like a lot of complaining. You know? I feel like there is so much complaining at the moment about where fighting games are at, and it feels, in some ways, from the perspective of people that really like this shit, it almost feels like they're at their worst. And to me, it kind of feels like we're at the best. To me, it's like, dude, there are so many like really good fighting games that are legit super good and look amazing, and a lot of them play incredibly online. And a lot of them are getting things like crossplay and shit. Way more information access inside the games than even ever before. I've been actively following and actively pursuing this genre professionally for 13 to 15 years, casually, competitively following it for 10 years before that, and then just, you know, an absolute noob just hitting buttons early in the 90s and shit. But to be real, like, it almost feels like we're in a better spot right now, just in terms of the entire genre, than we were in the 90s. It's so good right now, it's insane. I understand complaints, but I also can echo a sentiment that seems very, very, very active since Street Fighter 6, the shifting of communities from previous games to new games, and as well as Tekken. There is so much complaining. there is an aggressive amount of complaining, and not even like complaining for a critical sort of reason. Some of it is like, oh yeah, maybe a game isn't as good as the previous game and we are demanding better quality. But some of it comes from a point where the game is really good. There's really not much wrong with it, and there still is an insane amount of complaining. I think that's something that developers are going to have to really focus on and tackle, because the difference now is that it isn't about where the games are currently at the moment. It's more about where they're going to go, and we don't know the future, and we don't know what their plans are for like games like Street Fighter 6, as well as even Mortal Kombat and Tekken 8. It's gonna change. Things will change. Things won't be as insane as they are right now. All I gotta say with this entire situation is sort of like more broad stroke. I take a few steps back and I'm like, I kind of feel like we have it better than we ever have been. And just to take myself out of this situation, my viewership in terms of, you know, content that I make, just to compare, is significantly worse. Just overall. Why is it worse? Because there's so many other experts in the field now making content for all of these games. This isn't a, oh, fighting, we got new fighting games, there's new audiences, there's a ton of people watching, I'm making money, right? It's actually the opposite in most situations, where the viewership I have on videos ever since the pandemic happened has gone down because more people are making content than ever before. More people aren't being professional fighting game players. These gods at these games are just focusing making content and stuff. Again, another broad stroke. Oh, I just want new games so I can make more money. No, I truly feel that fighting games are better than they ever have been right now. I truly feel that way. Old game versus new game 2. New Age of Discourse.